Okay, so yeah, I'm here with Ian, and we're going to talk about John Vervaeke's Awakening from the Meaning Crisis in his lecture series. It's episode 13, and in his book, it's chapter 12, and it's on Buddhism and parasitic processing. The basic thing is he's going to try to talk about what he thinks is a misunderstanding in the West of Buddhism and or real basic Buddhism, and what he thinks can be done about that, and kind of, yeah, linking it with cognitive science and explaining it with cognitive science and psychology, and sort of linking it with sort of his idea of Platonic anagoge or ascent, sort of like ascent from the cave in Plato's Republic. So we were gonna kind of just go through, give a summary of his lecture and chapter, and then kind of go just start discussing it, right? And Ian, you have a lot of experience and understanding of Buddhism, and so yeah, it should make for a pretty lively discussion.
Yeah, yeah. Before you start, I just want to sort of prologue that I have I've sort of studied Buddhism as a topic, not as an like a academic discipline, but just as on my own reading. I'm trying to understand what it means for a long, long time.
Mm,
And I've been a practitioner through Zen and a few other traditions since the mid 2000s.
mm.
And the unpacking the understanding of Buddhist terminology is something that's very important to me. I like understanding words and what they mean and what they're trying to point to. So I spent a long time developing my own framework around these concepts that is informed by all of the reading and all of the studying that I've been doing, but I don't represent a particular lineage. I don't want to claim anything because it's something I've put together, and so I don't want to claim authority that I don't have. I also want to say I know a lot of Vervaeke's work is something I really like, but this particular take I personally disagree with. So I'm not disagreeing with the man. I think he's great. I think his work is amazing. I think he's doing a lot of good work in the world, better than I'm doing. A lot of respect to him. So this is just sort of a chemistry of ideas. And same thing with Stephen Batchelor. I don't know much about Stephen Batchelor. I know he comes into it, so I don't mean anything against him or his work. I don't know anything about him other than this particular podcast that the Meaning Crisis episode that I listened to. So
Yeah, thank you for saying that. Yeah, that I like that chemistry of ideas, and it sounds like we're just trying to be very responsible with these ideas and to understand them deeply, and to kind of expostulate them in the best way we can.
I hope so.
So at the beginning of it's in the episode in the chapter. I'll just use those terms probably interchangeably. He talks about the background, like earlier in the lecture series and the book. So they examined mystical experiences and higher states of consciousness through the lens of science. And they found that these states are pretty much universal, which that tells you a lot when something is cross-cultural. And they seem to have also a rational aspect. Now, some people emphasize the metaphysical content of these and come up with contradictory and results all over the board. There is a God, there is no God, there are, interdimensional dwarf-like beings that I've encountered, all this kind of stuff. But they don't get into that content, but it's more like we must accept that plausibility rather than certainty is the standard here. And that's kind of a theme with Vervaeke. Even in science, plausibility is emphasized rather than certainty when you're trying to judge whether something is knowledge or not. Uh, so yes, they will ignore metaphysical claims on or confirmable theories. So these states heighten our cognitive fluency, which is the ease of information processing. And cognitive fluency makes content seem more real and we learn it better. So it's a very important thing in life, and it's important that we kind of get it right. Uh, so that grants us life altering insights that allow us to connect more meaningfully with ourselves and with other people. That's a quote. And with this framework, we can then understand the awakening of the Buddha. We can understand sati, mindfulness of the being mode, and we can have a project of overcoming systematic illusion that is analogous to the development from the child to the adult. So, uh, as the child is to the adult is to the sage. It's sort of the insight and the wisdom of the sage is to the adult, as that of the adult is to the child. And so that's not about propositional knowledge, but yeah, more like I said about insight and deeper understanding. Okay, so to talk about the crisis in understanding in Buddhism. Now, this is where we get into Stephen Batchelor's work. So he says that there is kind of like two ways in the West, supposedly, that we understand Buddhism. One is that we think you can only understand it from within a Buddhist tradition. And here, Vervaeke does emphasize perspectival and participatory knowing, which is very strong there. And he emphasizes those kinds of knowing for everything in Awakening from the Meaning Crisis. But there are so many traditions, it's kind of maybe hard to say, what Buddhism is from within. And then there's the other side is the in the West, which is the academic approach. Many of these people do not practice and they want to maintain objectivity. Um, and so they lose the participatory aspect when they're studying it that way. And he says that this split is like the problem that Socrates faced between the sophists on the one hand and the natural philosophers, the proto scientists on the other. So the sophists had, they were sort of public speakers, uh, uh, practitioners of rhetoric that emphasized relevance of statements without concern for the truth, concern for the good. And the natural philosophers emphasized truth without relevance. They were trying to understand the natural world, sort of analogous to scientists now, scientists nowadays. But they didn't have a concern with what was relevant to human life and to developing wisdom. So, practicing Buddhism provides transformative relevance, and academic study searches for truth. Batchelor argues that we must overcome our biases so that Buddhism includes both aims. Nowadays, we tend to see both these approaches to Buddhism, like we do other things real and spiritual, as being about beliefs. And this is a point that Vervaeke kind of makes in general about other religions and everything, our misapprehension of maybe the best view of Christianity, too. So this is inherited from the post-Christian scientific enlightenment. Different kind of enlightenment, of course, than the Buddhist one. Uh, quote, breaking out of this reduction will be crucial for addressing the meaning crisis, unquote. So belief systems are attempts to create meaning, but they often fail because meaning occurs at lower levels. And so Batchelor says we must look at Buddhism existentially. So now this is basically Batchelor's kind of Buddhism is supposedly kind of trying to correct our idea of Buddhism in the West. So our understanding of Buddhism as a system of beliefs is not exactly wrong, but it's incomplete. And he tries to re reimagine or re-articulate the Four Noble Truths. So the Four Noble Truths are meant to help personal transformation, such as by higher states of consciousness, improved insight, cognitive fluency, affording a more optimal grip in the agent arena relationship. That's sort of like adapting optimally to whatever environment you're in. That's from Merleau-Ponty, and they are to help to achieve sati or remembrance and mindfulness. And so Vervaeke kind of uh, adapts Batchelor's four ennobling truths, and he calls them the four ennobling provocations. So he's trying to provoke our action, provoke transformation, rather than to initiate a belief. So the first noble truth is generally understood as all life is suffering or all is suffering. And so this could, on its face, kind of just seem untrue. If all is suffering, then nothing is particularly suffering, or, when you're happy, are you suffering too? So it's maybe a little bit hard to understand. So he says to suffer is to be set with the loss of agency in the world. And both pain and pleasure can do this. Quote, most of Buddha's metaphors are not about pain, but about entrapment metaphors. So Buddha described enlightenment not in terms of relief from pain, but in terms of freedom, which is the opposite of entrapment, of course. So instead of all is suffering, he proposes to sort of formulate it like your whole life is threatened with a loss of agency. So this is related to Vervaeke's general teaching of that which makes you adaptively intelligent also makes you vulnerable to foolishness. So, for example, uh, let's say you have an experience and you interpret it as bad, and that sensitizes you to that in the future. You anticipate that kind of thing happening again. And since we cannot process everything, we have to rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts. And so those things are good. They help us to process information because the amount of information in the environment available at any one time is infinite. We have to have some kind of shortcuts. Those are good, except when they're not, of course. So memories encode something of what it is like to be you in your experiences. And this is adaptive since your brain is always trying to fit you to your environment. One bad state can recall another. So you start to look for more of this kind of thing to happen. And then when it does, your belief is confirmed. And so you start to form this negative valuation in that of yourself or that particular something about that experience, and you're generalizing. And because of our heuristics, we misjudge probabilities all the time. Like famous example is that like we have an availability heuristic. So like it's easy to imagine a plane falling from the sky. And so we are much more afraid of dying in an airplane crash than we are of dying in a car on the way to the airport. But statistically, we're much more likely to be hurt in the second case. So moving on. Um, so dukkha is dukkha suffering is and parasitic processing and reciprocal narrowing. So heuristic judgments that we make all the time are emotional. They're not emotionally neutral. The brain projects a high probability of a negative event, and that produces anxiety that narrows and makes our framing more rigid. And then we have a lower ability to solve problems. You can see how this can happen in sort of a negative feedback loop, and you kind of come to some conclusion, something like I am doomed. Uh, Therefore, all of your life is threatened by dukkha. Um, the brain can get into all sorts of negative spirals like this. So he relates this to Dr. Lewis's model of addiction, which is not about chemicals. Uh, and his model of addiction is that it is a loss of agency through reciprocal narrowing. So, for example, you start taking a drug and you lose some of your cognitive flexibility, and the number of options in the world declines. As the options decline, the variability in your cognitive agency goes down. The world feels less accessible and scarcer, and you start to get more and more stuck inside yourself. There's a famous quote that sort of expresses this from C.S. Lewis is that the doors of hell are locked on the inside. So yeah, dukkha could be understood in that parasitic processing happens within, and then reciprocal narrowing happens without. So you do want your system to be self-organizing because you cannot do all things consciously. But that nature of being self-organizing and the other things that characterize our psychology also makes us prone to suffer. So the second noble truth is often understood, is typically kind of formulated as suffering is caused by desire. And Batchelor reformulates that as realize that you can recover your agency. How can you do that? If there is one of these downward spirals, there is therefore also an upward spiral, and that's anagoge. That's Platonic. That's a Platonic version of enlightenment. That's as he talks about in the Republic, an ascent out of the cave of illusions into understanding of the truth itself. Um, yes, a pernicious dynamical system is countered by another type of dynamical system, and it would tutor and one that would tutor my beliefs, but also provide altered states of consciousness, help develop skills and character, which of course Vervaeke talks about throughout the series. And so there's a model of the eightfold path, the eightfold path, and which is generally right thinking, right understanding, right speech, right action, right livelihood, right effort, right mindfulness, and right concentration, which he divides into cognition, character, and consciousness. And typically the eightfold path is represented as a wheel, and that's a counter to dukkha's grinding wheel, and it's a self-organizing system that kind of turns itself, although you have to work on each individual spoke on its own. And the right in those right understanding, right thinking, and everything is as in a right hand, a sort of optimal grip understanding. And so, yeah, so in summary, realize that the threat and the possibility of living in a dream, a quote, blithe, modally confused life beset by agentless influence is real, but also realize that there is the possibility of a life beyond all of that. So that's kind of a real rough and ready kind of take on Vervaeke's take, along with Stephen Batchelor, of maybe Buddhism and sort of the misunderstanding of Buddhism in the West.